It wasn't the sirens that froze me, it was the sound of the cuffs. That sharp metallic click, loud enough to slice through the hymn playing softly in my hearing aids, louder even than the murmuring of nearby shoppers pretending not to see. The police hadn't drawn their guns, not yet. But they had drawn a line, one that cut straight through that little grocery aisle and down into the soul of a town that's long been good at smiling while it wounds. I wasn't supposed to be there. The Lord knows, I had no business walking all that way from Chestnut Ridge Baptist to Chestnut General on a Wednesday morning, just to buy a can of tomatoes and feel less alone. But that's what widowers do when the house is too quiet and the air too thick with ghosts. It's been 6 months since Ruth passed. 78 years old, and I still reach for her side of the bed in the dark. Still leave her teacup on the counter, clean and dry, like hope itself. The ache doesn't lessen. It just moves in, permanent as the morning stiffness in my knees. That morning, I stood near the end of aisle 6, my old cane trembling slightly against the polished tile, when I saw the young woman, Clara Bell-Watkins, trying to explain something to the store manager. I didn't know her name then. All I saw was a calm, composed figure in a gray Howard University sweatshirt, her voice low but steady, her hands never leaving her sides. And then the police came. 2 deputies. One heavy-set, pink in the face, moving like a man who believed his belt carried more than authority. The other, younger and pale, scanned the shelves like danger might leap out from between the cereal boxes. They didn't ask her anything. Not at first. They went straight to the manager. Then to the woman who had accused her, a sharp-nosed, pearl-wearing customer who looked like she'd mistaken the woman for a storm cloud in her sunshine routine. I watched it happen. I didn't blink. My hands clenched the handle of my cane like a cross. The officers turned to her finally, asking for ID. She gave it. Politely. She said her name, said she was a doctor, and said she lived 3 blocks away. I heard every word. So did everyone else. But the cuffs came anyway. Not because she resisted. Not because she ran. But because she existed in a place where she wasn't meant to, wearing a face that this town still mistrusts beneath its polished veneer. I remember the way her eyes flicked sideways, just once, searching for someone. Anyone. And I remember how I looked away. You might ask why. Why didn't I speak up? Why didn't I raise my voice? I've asked myself the same thing every night since. Because I've been that voice before, I've marched. I've knelt. I've shouted into bullhorns and bowed in prayer circles. And I've buried too many friends who did the same. Sometimes quietly, sometimes not. Sometimes in pine boxes, sometimes in memory only. But that morning, I was tired. Not the tired of age, but the tired of faith tested too many times and found wanting. I watched her wrists pulled behind her back, and the memory hit me like a hymn in reverse. My mother, in 1964, arms bruised from being shoved by police in Montgomery. My uncle Joseph was arrested for walking while black with a copy of the mobile register tucked under his arm. The deputy didn't speak with force. He didn't need to. His silence was sharper. The way he tightened the cuffs, ignoring her quiet protests, ignoring her title, her address, her humanity. She's got something on her, the younger one muttered. They always do. I don't remember dropping my can of tomatoes. But I remember the hollow sound it made on the floor, like it too was stunned. Clara didn't cry. Not then. That's what shook me the most. She didn't shout or plead. She just stood there, head held high, even as her dignity was marched past rows of shoppers who suddenly became fascinated by frozen peas and soup cans. No one said a word. Not the cashier. Not the manager. Not the white woman who'd made the accusation. Not me. I stood there, still and ashamed, while the crowd parted like judgment. And as she passed me, escorted by 2 uniforms and 1 fabricated lie, our eyes met for a second. Just a second. And in that second, something passed between us. Not blame. Not anger. Something quieter. Sadder. As if to say, you too. That look broke something inside me that sermons never touched. The sun was shining when they led her outside. It always shines here. Chestnut Ridge is the kind of town where even injustice is polite. Where signs say, God bless, over lawns that exclude, and churches hum with gospel on Sundays while casting stones in silence all week long. I followed slowly. Not because I knew what to do, but because my legs carried me, bone memory from decades of walking behind crosses and coffins. I stepped outside just in time to hear her say, I'm a neurosurgeon. I need my hands. The officer laughed. Laughed. Right there, as if her plea was a punchline. And I felt heat rise in my chest, not the fire of righteous anger, but something else. A tightening. A cold sweat. An ache. I tried to call out. Tried to say her name, though I still didn't know it. The world tilted. My cane slipped. And then. Darkness. Not full. Not soft. Just collapsing inward. Like a church bell muffled mid-ring. I remember voices, muffled, panicked. The sound of shoes on concrete. A woman's voice, firm, focused, calm. Sir, can you hear me? I'm Dr. Clara Bell-Watkins. You're having a cardiac event. Stay with me. Her hands pressed hard on my chest. I remember thinking, not clearly, but deeply, that this was the same woman they'd just called a thief. The same hands that restrained me were now trying to restart my heart. And somewhere inside me, where breath met guilt, I whispered. I saw what they did. I'm sorry I didn't. But the words drowned in the distance. When I came to, I was in an ambulance. She was beside me, speaking to the paramedics with calm authority, listing my symptoms, estimating the time of collapse, detailing everything with the clarity of a seasoned healer. She caught my eye as they lifted me out. I told you, she said softly. I'm a doctor. And then, as the doors closed, she turned away, not seeking thanks, not seeking applause, just moving on to save the next person, the next life, with hands the world had tried to chain. That night, I wept for the first time since Ruth's funeral. Not just for myself, but for every moment I stood silent in my life when I should have spoken. For every time I thought my age permitted me to withdraw. For every moment of quiet complicity, dressed in the robes of caution. And I wept for Clara. Because that woman, the one I didn't defend, is the reason I'm alive. The next morning, I sat in the pews of my empty church and stared at the altar. I didn't pray. I didn't know what to say. But I made a vow. That whatever days the Lord gives me from here on, they'll be spent walking beside the ones I once watched from a distance. And maybe, just maybe I'd earn back the right to stand when it matters. The day after Clara Bell-Watkins saved my life, I returned to Chestnut General. Not with a purpose. Not with pride. But with something that felt like shame, braided tightly with obligation. I needed to see the place again, not to understand what had happened, but to fully believe it had. The air inside was cool, clinical, and precisely indifferent. No one glanced up as I stepped across the linoleum tiles with the slow rhythm of age and recovery. The same cashier rang up customers. The same jazz tune drifted over the loudspeakers, polished of urgency. In the produce section, the organic kale still sat misted under that perfect supermarket dew, as if no woman had ever been accused there. As if no pulse had ever faltered by the potatoes. But I remembered everything. And everything had changed. I hovered near the place where it happened, the corner where Clara had been stopped. Where her composure collided with prejudice. Where I, a man of God, had gripped my cane instead of justice. I ran a hand along the cold edge of a shopping cart. Behind me, someone cleared their throat. A voice, familiar, nasal, guarded. "Back so soon, Reverend?" I turned. It was the store manager, Mike Harrington. Tall, stiff, with the kind of face that had spent a lifetime managing complaints with half-smiles and hidden defensiveness. "Not a reverend," I said, correcting softly. "Just a deacon. Though I suppose the Lord doesn't mind job titles much." He chuckled politely, then grew awkward. "I, heard you collapsed out front. Real glad to see you're okay." I nodded but said nothing. The silence between us swelled like humidity. "Listen," he said after a beat, rubbing the back of his neck. "That woman, what's her name? Dr. Bell-Watkins. She okay?" "She's the reason I'm still breathing," I said plainly. He shifted. "Well, that's good then. I mean, that's fortunate. Still. I had to do what I did. There was a complaint, and you know these days, if someone accuses someone else, you gotta act. For insurance, legal stuff. It's not personal. Not personal. Two words that have shielded more injustice than bullets ever could." I let the silence sit. Let it grow teeth. He didn't last long. "I mean, you know how it is. Things escalate. You saw her, kinda firm, you know. She wasn't exactly apologetic. Should she have apologized for breathing?" I asked, not unkindly. He swallowed hard. "I didn't mean, look, it was just a misunderstanding." "Then why does my chest still ache when I think about it?" I asked, my voice low. He had no answer. Only a clipboard, a schedule, and the tired weight of a man more afraid of lawsuits than of sin. I left him there and walked slowly to the register. There, standing with 2 bags of apples and a coupon booklet, was the woman who had accused Clara. Susan Bradshaw. Pale as chalk. Hair stiff with hairspray. Eyes darting like a squirrel at dusk. She didn't see me at first. But I saw her. And what I saw was not a villain. Not a monster. But something sadder, a person who had never learned how to question her comfort. I cleared my throat gently. She turned. Flinched. "Mr. Morris." "Mrs. Bradshaw." A pause. Then her voice, small, clipped, and almost swallowed. "I didn't mean for it to go so far." "How far did you mean for it to go?" I asked. She flushed. I thought I was certain I'd seen her reach near my purse. And then I couldn't find my medication and I panicked. "You were certain," I said. "But wrong." Her mouth worked for words. None came out. "Do you know what it's like," I continued, "to be on the receiving end of someone else's certainty?" She looked down. "She saved my life," I added. "The woman you accused. Saved me with the hands they just tried to cuff." Her hands trembled slightly on her purse strap. "I thought I was protecting myself," she said. "From what?" I asked. "A quiet woman shopping for bell peppers." A pause. Then she whispered, "From feeling out of control." That's when I saw it, raw and unguarded. Not hate. Not spite. Just fear. The fear of a world she couldn't explain, and people she never really saw until they asked to be treated as equals. You still carry the pills? I asked gently. She reached into the very purse she'd once used as a weapon and unzipped the inner pocket. There it was, the same orange bottle. Untouched. We said nothing more. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the Bible open, though unread. I thought of Clara, how she must carry this weight every day. Not just the patients. Not just the surgeries. But the burden of being extraordinary is to be seen as human. My hands, still spotted with age, pressed flat against the scripture page. Not out of reverence. But out of guilt. I had lived long enough to know that silence is its kind of sin. 2 days later, I returned to church for the midweek prayer circle. Only 3 folks showed up. It was always small on Thursdays. Most folks waited for Sunday to feel holy. But I opened the meeting with a different kind of prayer. Lord, I said, forgive us not only for what we've done, but for what we refuse to see. The room shifted. Help us remember that neutrality in the face of wrong is not righteousness. That silence before harm is not humility. One woman, Sister Juanita, looked up, her eyes moist. You talking about that doctor from the store, Elijah? I nodded. She saved me. And I failed her. Later that evening, I stood at the edge of the church lawn, watching the sun set behind the willow tree Ruth loved. My hands trembled, not from age this time, but from something like conviction. I thought I'd done enough over these years. Sat on enough committees. Raised enough funds. Preached enough peace. But now I saw the difference between not causing harm and standing in the way of it. That night, I picked up the phone and called Clara's hospital. Left a message with the front desk. Tell her, the old man she revived at Chestnut General would like to speak with her. No rush. Just, tell her I owe her more than thanks. I didn't expect her to call back. But the next morning, she did. Mr. Morris. Her voice came through the line, warm and professional. Please, I said. Just Elijah. I hear you've been making quite the recovery. And I hear you've been making quite the city talk. She laughed lightly. I suppose I have. But I didn't do anything remarkable. Just, acted how I'd hoped someone would act for my father. That struck something deep. The way she placed herself was not as a savior, but as a daughter. A neighbor. A human being. I didn't help you, I said. When they grabbed you. I froze. Her voice was soft. You weren't the only one. I'm sorry. I know. Pause. Can I do something for you, Clara? There was silence on her end for a moment. Then, yes. Speak. Tell me what you saw. That one sentence planted something in me. Not a seed, but a vow. I began writing that night. A letter to the local paper. Another to the police board. A statement to the hospital board, attesting to Clara's professionalism, her humanity, her strength. And then I wrote a sermon, not one I'd ever preach on a Sunday, but one I would live. It began with a confession. There are aisles in every town. Silent places between truth and comfort. And I, Elijah Morris, have walked those aisles too many times with my eyes closed. But no more. There are some weights you don't notice until you try to stand without them. The day after I mailed my letters, every one stamped by hand at the Chestnut Ridge post office, I felt something lift from my back. Not forgiveness. That would come later, if it ever did. But a small sliver of peace. A beginning. Still, peace is not the same as absolution. The weight of watching without acting, that one lingers. It sticks to your ribs like old grief, whispering in the quiet between breaths. I began to see it everywhere after that. Not just what had happened to Clara, but what happens, over and over, in this town, and others like it. I began to remember all the silences I had mistaken for safety. At the barber shop, someone cracked a joke about thugs in scrubs. I didn't laugh. At the hardware store, a cashier followed a young black boy through the aisles while pretending to restock light bulbs. I made sure she saw me watching her. At church, one of the deacons, Harold Banks, asked me if I was getting political. I looked him in the eye and said, "No, brother. I'm getting honest." Memory's a funny thing. Once you start opening the door to it, the whole hallway lights up. I remembered a boy named Willie Cobb, 15, smart as a whip, good at math, fast on his feet. He used to help my father polish pews back when I was still chasing grasshoppers outside the church doors. One day, Willie was walking home with a loaf of bread and a carton of milk. A white woman accused him of stealing her purse. No trial. No mercy. They found him hanging from a pecan tree 3 miles from town. I remembered his face. And I remembered how, at the time, my uncle, deacon at the church then, told us, "Let the Lord sort it out. Don't stir the pot." So we prayed. And stayed silent. But the Lord doesn't sort what we refuse to lift. And some prayers only reach the ceiling. I was sitting on my front porch one afternoon, rocking gently in the chair Ruth had painted blue, when a car pulled up slowly in front of my house. Black sedan. Government plates. The man who stepped out wore a dark suit, gray at the temples, military bearing, though he wasn't in uniform. "Colonel Harold Watkins," he said, extending a hand. "Clara's husband." I stood carefully. Shook his hand. "She told me about you, sir," he said. "Said you were the one who collapsed at the market." "And she was the one who caught me," I replied. He nodded, eyes sharp with a kind of silent gratitude. I wanted to meet the man who saw what happened. Who lived I? We sat on the porch. Just 2 old men, in different uniforms, his starched and official, mine woven from years and regrets. "I've been in combat," he said quietly. "But nothing makes me angrier than what happened to my wife." I didn't interrupt. "She's been saving lives since she was 23. Valedictorian. Johns Hopkins. Led her department. And yet one woman points a finger, and 2 officers treat her like she's stolen something more than breath." He leaned forward. "I need people to understand, Mr. Morris. Not just in court. But in the community. In spirit. Because this fight. It's bigger than us." I felt the words settle into me like scripture, clearer than any sermon I'd heard in years. That weekend, I asked Clara to come speak at the church. Not as a victim. But as a witness. A witness to dignity. She hesitated at first. "I'm not a public speaker," she said. "I don't like attention." "Then don't give a speech," I told her. "Just give them the truth." She came on a Sunday morning, dressed not in scrubs, but a simple navy dress with a cross pin at the collar. Her hair was tied back. Her presence is quiet but undeniable. I introduced her. "Saints," I said, "this is Dr. Clara Bell-Watkins. She's here not because of what happened to her, but because of what she did, and what we didn't." There was no podium. She stood before the pulpit, hands clasped gently. And she spoke. "I never wanted to be anyone's headline," she said. "I just wanted groceries. I wanted a quiet morning with oranges and almond milk." Instead, I was accused, doubted, handcuffed, humiliated. She paused. "I've been in operating rooms where people were bleeding out from car crashes and brain hemorrhages. I've had fathers beg me to save their children. I've had my mother kiss my gloved hand. But I've never felt as unseen, as disbelieved as I did in that grocery store." She turned to the crowd. "And then I met a man, your Deacon Elijah, who had every reason to look away, and yet still found a way to stand back up." I felt my throat tighten. Ruth would have been proud of her. Clara continued. "This isn't just about me. It's about every person who walks into a room and feels the air change. Who sees clutching purses, locked car doors, and suspicious glances. It's about proving ourselves twice, 3 times, always." She stepped back. And the sanctuary was so silent, I could hear the soft hum of the ceiling fan above the altar. Then someone stood up. Then another. And before I knew it, the entire congregation, black, white, brown, old, young, rose to their feet. Not in applause, but in recognition. It was the most reverent silence I'd ever heard. After the service, I watched Clara and her husband speak to members of the church. Smiles. Tears. A few hugs. A few hesitant questions. But most of all, a sense of collective awakening. Sister Juanita hugged her hard. "You don't have to prove anything to us, baby," she whispered. But Clara just smiled. "That's the dream. One day, no one will have to." That evening, I sat at Ruth's piano and played the hymn she used to sing when times felt hard, "His Eye is on the Sparrow." The notes came slowly, unevenly. But the memory was clear. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without apology. But stories like Clara's don't end with church services. They don't end with applause. They continue, inside systems, behind closed doors, in police stations, and city halls. And if we turn away again, they repeat. Like hymns in the wrong key. Like history with laryngitis. The thing about the body is that it remembers. Even when the heart survives the stopping, even when the lungs remember their rhythm, something in you never quite forgets what it means to fall. Since the day Clara saved me, my steps had grown slower, not from weakness, but from reverence. I wasn't afraid of dying. But I was afraid of dying before I did something worthy of breath. That fear became a rhythm of its own. Each morning, I'd wake before sunrise and sit with my hand resting on the small scar above my collarbone, a reminder that a stranger's mercy had pulled me back from the edge. A reminder that the next collapse wouldn't come with a warning. But not all collapses are physical. Some are the kind that split a town in two. The video came out on a Thursday. Someone had filmed the entire encounter at Chestnut General. Not just the handcuffing, but the way Clara's voice stayed calm while they treated her like a threat in sneakers. The angles were shaky. The sound dipped in places. But the story was clear, brutally so. And that's when everything began to break. Local news picked it up by afternoon. By Friday, it had hit regional coverage. By Saturday, there were hashtags and interviews, and opinion columns. Clara's name, once anonymous, now echoed through living rooms and smartphones like a gospel some didn't want to hear. Chestnut Ridge, Alabama, had become a symbol. Not of justice. Not yet. But of exposure. At the heart of it all was the truth. And the truth, it turns out, is never enough to stop the trembling of those who feel seen for the first time, and threatened by that clarity. I received a letter in my church mailbox, no return address, just block handwriting. Should have stayed dead. I didn't show Clara. Didn't want to weigh her down. She already carried more than she should. Clara, for her part, didn't run. She walked taller. But I could see it, the exhaustion beneath her skin. The way her fingers trembled slightly when handing someone a pen. The way she scanned crowds not in fear, but in calculation. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She was looking for warning signs. And isn't that its kind of theft? When a person of grace has to spend every moment bracing for insult or assault while trying to do the Lord's work through science. One Sunday evening, I invited her and Colonel Watkins to dinner. Nothing fancy. Just my fried catfish, Ruth's old cornbread recipe, and a pitcher of sweet tea with lemon wedges floating like lazy boats. We ate on the porch. The sky had just begun to melt into gold. "You two holding up?" I asked. Harold nodded, carefully. Clara didn't lie. "We're managing," she said. "It's a strange thing, being believed by millions of strangers but doubted by people across the street." Her voice wasn't bitter. Just bone-weary. "People here still look at me like I broke something," she added. And maybe I did. Maybe I broke the illusion. I wanted to tell her that illusions deserve to shatter. That sometimes, the only path to healing is through the rubble. But she already knew. After dinner, we sat in a soft, hymnal silence. And then she said it. "I never asked for this. I just wanted to be left alone. To do my job. To love my husband. To buy lettuce without a spotlight. But now, I feel like I have to be something more. Not for me. For the girls coming after me. For the ones watching." She looked at me then. And in her gaze, I saw something ancient and holy. The gaze of a healer. A warrior. A tired prophet who never asked to preach. "Don't carry it all alone," I said. "Let us carry some." She smiled, but it was the kind of smile people wear when they're afraid to let go of the load, even for a moment. The next day, the protests began. Not massive. Not wild. But deliberate. Silent marches. Letters to the editor. Handwritten signs outside the police station, "Justice for Clara. Dignity for all." Then came the counter-murmurs. Whispers in barber shops. Talk radio hosts are calling her dramatic. Anonymous comments online suggested she escalated by asking to call her husband. Even a city councilman on a hot mic muttered, "Why didn't she just be polite?" Politeness. As if grace under pressure had ever saved us from a bullet, or a bias. The real collapse came a week later. Not mine. Not Clara's. But the collapse of silence. A nurse at St. Agnes Hospital filed a report. Her schedule had been altered after defending Clara publicly. A firefighter admitted he'd been told to stay out of it if he wanted a promotion. A high school teacher, whose daughter idolized Clara, shared that her tires had been slashed in the school parking lot. Then came the footage. Body cam clips released under pressure. We saw the way the officers smirked before approaching her. We heard one say, "Here comes another one of those important types. Let's see how important she feels in cuffs." The truth became unavoidable. And the town cracked. They held a town hall at the community center. People spilled out of the doors. White folks, black folks, church folks, folks who hadn't been to church since Reagan. I sat in the front row, next to Clara and Harold. Mayor Patricia Coulson, red-faced and perspiring, called for order. "Now's the time for healing," she said into the mic. "No," someone shouted from the back. "Now's the time for accountability." Clara didn't speak first. Harold did. His voice was firm. His tone is military-grade respectful. But he made it clear. "You put your hands on a woman who's delivered more children into this world than most of you have names in your phone book. You cuffed a physician who holds people's lives between her fingers. You humiliated a citizen who pays taxes and mentors students, and mops her floor on Sundays. You owe her more than a headline. You owe her the truth." The room didn't cheer. It breathed. Because truth has a sound. Then Clara stood. And the room didn't breathe. She didn't read a statement. She didn't hold up a phone. She just spoke. "I didn't come here for revenge," she began. "I came here because I couldn't keep walking through Chestnut Ridge pretending I was invisible." Her voice was the kind of steady that only comes from someone who's been silenced too long. "You don't have to believe my title. You don't have to like my hairstyle. But you do have to believe in my humanity. Because it doesn't end where your comfort begins." She looked at the police chief. "I needed help. I got handcuffs. I needed understanding. I got humiliated. I needed my community. And most of it turned away." She turned back to the crowd. "But I'm still here." Silence. Then someone clapped. Then another. Then the whole room. But Clara didn't beam. She bowed her head slightly. Not in pride. In prayer. Some collapses come with noise. Some with applause. Some with the sound of a woman standing quietly and refusing to shrink. That was the night Chestnut Ridge changed. Maybe not forever. But enough. Some moments feel like endings, even when they are only thresholds. The night of the town hall had left the air heavy, like thunder had passed through but never fully broken. People filed out of that community center as if they'd just left a funeral, not of a person, but of a version of this town they'd clung to for too long. Chestnut Ridge, Alabama, had always prided itself on being peaceful. Quiet streets, well-trimmed hedges, polite greetings. But peace without justice is just a lullaby for the privileged. That night, many of us finally heard the silence we'd mistaken for virtue. And Clara? She didn't leave that room triumphant. She left it drained. The next morning, I found myself at St. Agnes Memorial Hospital, not as a patient, but as a presence. I needed to see her, if only to remind her she wasn't alone in that crowd of stares and sympathy. I signed in at the front desk and waited, watching people pass, doctors moving quickly, nurses navigating impossible workloads, patients gripping folders, diagnoses, hopes. The hospital has its kind of rhythm, a quiet hymn of vigilance and grace. After 20 minutes, Clara emerged from the elevator in a navy blue lab coat and soft sneakers. Her eyes were tired, but her back was straight. She walked like someone whose burdens had roots, but whose spine refused to bend. "Deacon Elijah," she greeted. "You here for a checkup, or are you checking on me?" "Both," I said, offering a half smile. She led me to the hospital garden, one of those small, glass-walled spaces with a bench, a few potted trees, and a bubbling fountain that sounded more optimistic than the world allowed. "How are you sleeping?" I asked gently. Clara tilted her head. "Some nights I dream of scalpels and sirens. Some nights I don't dream at all." "And your hands?" She opened them slowly. No tremble. Just steadiness. "They still know how to hold a life," she said. even after they tried to hold me like a suspect. It was then that the hospital pager on her hip buzzed. She checked the alert, her expression shifting instantly. Trauma code, pediatric. Or 2. She stood, already moving. A 10-year-old. Blunt head trauma. Motorcycle accident. You go, I said. I'll pray. She nodded once, and then she was gone, back through those glass doors, a woman moving toward brokenness, not away from it. They had tried to diminish her. They had tried to bind her, reduce her. But they'd forgotten, a healer doesn't need permission to heal. And sometimes the greatest defiance is simply continuing to do your work with excellence in the face of doubt. That evening, the news broke. The 2 officers involved in Clara's detainment, Deputy Ray Mallard and Deputy Kyle Denton, had been suspended pending investigation. The body cam footage had drawn national attention. The state attorney general had launched a civil rights inquiry. But even justice, when late, doesn't feel like triumph. Clara didn't celebrate. She went home, fed her dog, reviewed patient files, and returned to the hospital the next morning. There was still a brain to repair, a child to stabilize, a shift to cover for a nurse whose son had the flu. I called her the next day to ask how the surgery had gone. Kid stable, she said. But the mother held my hand afterward and asked me, why would they do that to someone like you? Her voice faltered, just for a moment. I didn't know how to answer her. Maybe, I offered gently, because you made them confront the fact that someone like you exists. She was quiet. Then, that's not a burden I want to keep carrying. That week, a group of medical interns at St. Agnes formed a support circle. They called it the Unseen Hands, a space for BIPOC healthcare professionals to talk, grieve, reflect, and build strength. Clara didn't start it. She didn't even attend the first few. But eventually, she walked in, sat at the back, and listened as a young Haitian-American resident shared how she'd been mistaken for a janitor 4 times that month. How did you respond? Someone asked the young woman. I smiled, she said. But it didn't feel like grace. It felt like survival. That's when Clara stood. She didn't preach. She just said, it's okay to be tired. It's okay to be angry. But don't let them make you believe that being brilliant is the only way to deserve respect. She looked around the room. We are allowed to exist even on our days off. In sweatshirts. At grocery stores. And with that, the unseen hands became a movement. As for me, I began to see Clara's face in more places than the newspaper. A high school guidance counselor asked if she'd speak to the senior science class. A local art teacher painted her portrait in soft brush strokes, strong shoulders, tired eyes, steady hands. Even the mayor, after weeks of political tightrope walking, requested a private meeting. Clara declined. She didn't want optics. She wanted change. Then came the second collapse. But this time, it wasn't of the body. It was of community complicity. A leaked audio recording surfaced, someone in the precinct, mocking Clara's hero complex, calling her the mayoress of martyrdom. The speaker? Officer Mallard's supervisor. The city erupted. Protests returned, not silent this time, but with drums, chants, and testimonies. And at the center of it all, once again, Clara. But this time, she didn't speak. She stood in the crowd. Anonymous, unshielded. Holding the hand of a teenage girl who whispered that she wanted to be a surgeon just like her. That silence. It was louder than any podium. A week later, a small miracle happened. A letter arrived at the church. Handwritten. From Officer Kyle Denton. Deacon Morris. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to say, I was wrong. I followed orders instead of instincts. I saw a calm woman and treated her like a threat. I can't change that day. But I can change what I do going forward. If Dr. Watkins ever wants to speak with me, not as an apology, but as a beginning, I'd sit down in full humility. Thank you for not letting us all forget what happened. Kyle Denton. I showed Clara. She read it. Folded it slowly. Didn't say a word. Later that night, I asked her, will you meet with him? She thought long and hard. Then replied, only if he's willing to hear the whole story. Not just mine. But the ones that came before me. The ones that never made the news. I smiled. That's the story worth telling. Because here's the truth. They tried to put her in cuffs. But she used her hands to heal. They tried to strip her of identity. But she stood in her fullness. They tried to shrink her spirit. But she expanded the soul of the town. She is the storm they thought they could silence. And the shelter we didn't know we needed. There's a kind of sermon that doesn't need a pulpit. It isn't made of verse or voice, but of footsteps. Of choices. Of what a person does after the crowd stops clapping and the headlines fade. That kind of sermon, the quiet kind, it stays with you longer. It changes things. Clara Bell-Watkins never preached a word from my pulpit. But she taught me more about grace under fire than 1,000 Sunday mornings ever could. And if there was a gospel to her life, it was written in the tension between her strength and restraint, her silence and defiance, her healing hands and the world that tried to bind them. Word had spread far beyond Chestnut Ridge. Colleges wrote to her asking for commencement speeches. Churches invited her to be honored at luncheons and panels. She declined most of them. Not because she was ungrateful. But because she'd grown weary of being a symbol when she still had patients waiting on operating tables. I didn't survive this to become a metaphor, she told me once. I survived because I had work to do. I still do. But one invitation she didn't turn down came from an unexpected place. The seminary in Montgomery. A class on theology and medicine, how ethics, care, and belief intersect. They asked her to guest lecture. Not about scripture. But about dignity. She asked me to come with her. You're the one who knows the verses, she smiled. I packed my best suit. The one Ruth had tailored just for Easter Sundays. And we drove in near silence, save for the sound of wind brushing the windows. Montgomery hasn't changed much in 60 years. The streets still hold the echoes of marchers. The churches still lean on memory. And the air still hums with the stubborn ghost of America's unfinished work. Clara stood in front of 30 seminarians, most younger than her by half a lifetime. Some wore collars. Some wore jeans. But they all wore the same expression, curious, unsure, alert. She didn't start with what had happened to her. She started with what had happened to a patient. A woman came into the ER last week, she began. Severe migraine. Slurred speech. Her blood pressure was 210/120. Her scan showed a bleeding aneurysm. She paused. She'd been in pain for 2 days. But every doctor she'd visited told her she was probably just stressed. Because she was black. Because she was poor. Because her chart said she had anxiety. A few students shifted in their seats. I operated, Clara continued. She survived. Barely. She set down her notes. You want to serve people through faith? Then start by listening to the suffering you've been taught to overlook. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't quote Isaiah or Paul or the Gospel of John. She didn't need to. Her presence was the scripture. A walking parable. A living epistle written in the language of scars, science, and steel. After the lecture, one of the students approached us outside. He was tall, nervous, skin was the color of molasses. Maybe 22. "My sister's in nursing school," he said. "She was gonna drop out. Said she didn't think she belonged." He looked at Clara. "I showed her your story. She changed her mind." Clara didn't say thank you. She just reached out and squeezed his hand. That small gesture carried more weight than any sermon I'd ever given in my life. On the drive home, the sun began to lower, casting long lines across the highway. Clara spoke softly. "I'm still angry." "Good," I said. She looked at me. "Anger's a holy thing," I continued. "So long as it moves us forward and doesn't burn us down." She nodded, eyes on the road. "I just don't want to carry it forever." "Then don't," I said. "Let the rest of us carry some with you." The next day, I saw her again, this time in an unlikely place. The grocery store. Chestnut General. The same aisles. The same tile floors. The same sound of automatic doors sighing open. She was standing by the produce again. This time, holding a bunch of cilantro and humming. Not one person looked sideways at her. Not one security guard followed. The town had shifted. Maybe not enough. But enough to let her shop in peace. That peace, however, would soon be tested. 2 aisles over, an elderly white man, maybe late 70s, collapsed near the canned vegetables. People gasped. Someone screamed. Clara heard it. And without hesitation, she moved. She was at his side in seconds, already checking his pulse, calling for someone to fetch a defibrillator. Her voice, calm. Commanding. "Sir, I'm Dr. Clara Watkins. You're going to be okay." She performed CPR for 4 minutes until the ambulance arrived. And once again, I watched as the woman they once handcuffed saved another man with the same hands they tried to bind. After the paramedics took the man, the manager approached her. It was the same man. Mike Harrington. He looked pale. "Doctor," he said, voice wavering. "Thank you." She nodded politely. But before she could walk away, he added. "We were wrong. We were all wrong." Clara paused. She turned to him. And with the gentleness of someone who did not need to win a war she'd already survived, she said. "I don't need your apology." Then, after a breath. "But I do need you to change what happens next time." Later that night, I reflected on what I'd seen. I pulled out my old sermon notes, the ones I hadn't used in years. On the top sheet, in Ruth's handwriting, was a quote. "Preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words." It hit me then, like truth often does, not as thunder, but as a whisper behind your ribs. Clara wasn't just living the gospel. She was the gospel. The embodiment of grace, resilience, sacrifice, and unflinching love in a world quick to assume and slow to repent. They call her a hero now. But she doesn't wear that name like armor. She wears it like a weight. Because she knows that heroism isn't a cape, it's a bruise that keeps healing. It's a truth that keeps demanding. When I asked her if she would ever leave Chestnut Ridge, she surprised me. "No," she said. "I want to stay." "Why?" "Because this is where it happened," she answered. "And because this is where I healed." There's a tremor that doesn't start in the earth, but in the heart. It begins quietly, beneath skin and memory, beneath the scarred places we've trained ourselves to ignore. And when it comes, it doesn't shake buildings. It shakes certainty. The morning Clara Bell-Watkins walked into the courthouse, Chestnut Ridge did not shake, but I did. I stood by the oak trees across from the old red brick building that had hosted 1,000 minor infractions, petty disputes, and traffic citations. But not this. Not the reckoning of a town's conscience made flesh in a woman who refused to disappear. She wore no black robe, no white coat, just a gray dress and a navy cardigan, the same one she'd worn the day she saved my life. Her heels clicked softly on the pavement like punctuation in a slow, careful sentence. And behind her, following at a respectful distance, were faces I never thought I'd see in one place together: school teachers, hospital nurses, Vietnam veterans, cafeteria workers, church choir altos, even the janitor from the high school, still in his uniform. They didn't chant. They didn't shout. They walked with her. And in that walk was testimony. Inside, the courtroom was hushed. Reporters sat in the back, their pens clicking like insects. A few camera crews were allowed, their lenses aimed like quiet rifles. The judge, a silver-haired woman with glasses low on her nose, asked everyone to speak clearly. Clara was called to the stand. She took the oath without flinching. And then she began. Not with what was done to her, but with what had already been done to others. "I'm not here just for myself," she said. She looked at the jury. "I'm here for every black woman who's been followed through a department store. For every child, ask if they belong in the gifted program. For every man pulled over not for speeding, but for existing." She paused. "And I'm here," she added, her voice thickening, "for the people who stood by and said nothing. Because silence is not neutral. It was the kind of sentence that doesn't end when the sound stops. It lingers. It waits." The prosecutor asked her to recount the events. She did, with the clarity of a surgeon describing an incision. No embellishment. No melodrama. Just truth, laid open like muscle. The defense attorney, young, polished, uncomfortable in his skin, tried to suggest that her reaction had escalated things. "Dr. Watkins," he said, "you say you calmly asked to call your husband. Do you think that might have been perceived as confrontational?" Clara raised an eyebrow. "I said, may I please call my husband? If that's confrontation, then this room is a battlefield." A ripple of laughter, quickly stifled. The attorney shifted. Then came the videos. The body cam footage. The cell phone clips. The angles that showed her standing, shoulders squared, voice measured, even as her wrists were twisted behind her. And then came the moment that changed everything. The footage of her kneeling beside me, pressing her hands against my chest, counting compressions, shouting for aspirin. The same hands that had restrained were saving a life. On camera. In public. Without expectation. Without condition. The courtroom watched in silence. Some lowered their eyes. Others stared openly. The judge's fingers twitched on her gavel. I saw one juror wipe their cheek. Then it was my turn. They called me to the stand. I hadn't planned to speak. But I had worn my church suit anyway, the one with the tiny stitched cross on the lapel. Ruth's idea. She said it reminded people who they were, even when they forgot. I took the oath with a shaky voice. "My name is Elijah Morris," I began. "I'm a deacon. I'm 78 years old. And 6 months ago, I thought I was done learning how to be brave." I looked at Clara. But that day in the grocery store, I saw something I couldn't unsee. I saw dignity under assault. I saw the truth in handcuffs. And I said nothing. I let that silence sit in the room like smoke from a long-dead fire. They cuffed her, I said softly. And I collapsed. She saved me. Not because I deserved it, but because that's who she is. I paused. And if that's not a sermon, then I've wasted 50 years of Sundays. After I stepped down, other witnesses came forward. The nurse who worked with Clara. The teacher whose student she mentored. The high school security guard who said, "She treated my daughter's epilepsy when no one else would listen." They called it testimony. But it felt more like a confession. A town finally whispering its sins into the open. The officers were called too. One spoke flatly, by the book. The other, Denton, the younger one, looked Clara in the eye. "I didn't see a doctor," he said. "I saw a stereotype. That's on me." He turned to the judge. "She never raised her voice." "I did." He looked down. "I can't undo what I did. But I want to learn." In that moment, I saw something break, not in him, but in the wall around him. The wall that keeps good men from better selves. The trial ended quietly. There were no cheers. Just the sound of a community exhaling after holding its breath for far too long. The judge issued a formal reprimand, civil penalties, and referred the case to federal civil rights investigators. But the real justice had already begun outside the courthouse walls. That night, we held a vigil at the church. No press. No politicians. Just neighbors. People came forward to speak, not about Clara, but about their own moments of silence. Their own missed chances to stand up. "I saw it happen," said one woman. "And I looked away. I thought, not my business. I was wrong. I taught her in Sunday school," said another, through tears. "And I didn't even recognize her that day. What kind of blindness is that?" Each voice was a tremor. Together, they made an earthquake. Later, Clara stood by the altar, not to speak, but just to stand. And I introduced her, not with a title, but with truth. "This is Clara. She lives in this town. She heals people. And she forgave us before we even asked." Some gospels don't need to be written. They just need to be lived. And that night, we witnessed one. There are aisles we never return to. Aisles where something in us broke, where dignity was questioned, where a voice was silenced, where we learned that doing everything right still wasn't always enough. And yet some returns matter more than the leaving ever did. That's why, nearly 1 year to the day after it happened, Clara Bell-Watkins walked back into Chestnut General. This time, not to shop, but to speak. The store was under new management. The old manager, Mike Harrington, had resigned after an internal review. A community council had been formed to advise local businesses on bias prevention. Store cameras had been repositioned, hiring protocols restructured, and most surprisingly, a new plaque was installed near the front entrance. It read simply, "We remember what happened here. And we choose to be better." Clara didn't want a ribbon cutting. She didn't ask for applause. She just wanted to finish the walk she had been denied that day. I stood near the sliding glass doors, leaning lightly on my cane. This time, my posture wasn't from pain, but from reverence. I was watching something sacred unfold in ordinary light. Clara entered, wearing a simple green dress and flats. No white coat. No press behind her. Just her and her footsteps, soft, precise, unwavering. She moved down the produce aisle first, pausing briefly by the tomatoes. She picked one up, smiled, then set it back down. Then she walked past the cereal, the peanut butter, the vitamins. And finally, she stopped at the exact spot where the handcuffs had clicked behind her wrists. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She stood. And by standing, she reclaimed something no courtroom verdict could give. The store had invited the public to attend. Not as a stunt, but as a statement. People came, some to support, some to witness, some perhaps to apologize in the quiet ways the heart allows when the mouth cannot find words. A small platform had been set near the registers. When Clara stepped onto it, she didn't use a microphone. She didn't need one. Her voice was clear, soft, and stronger than steel. 1 year ago, she began, I stood right over there, trying to explain my humanity to people who'd already decided I didn't have any. She paused. I was judged. Mistrusted. Restrained. Another pause. And then, when someone collapsed, I was unshackled. Not because the truth had finally mattered. But because someone needed me. She looked around the store. And I went to him. Because healing is not something I do when I feel respected. It's something I do, period. Because it's who I am. She let the silence linger. I don't stand here today for justice. Justice is complicated. Delayed. Imperfect. I stand here for dignity. Mine. Yours. Ours. She looked to the corner where I stood. And I stand here for the man whose heart stopped, who found breath again, not just in his lungs, but in his voice. I felt something warm rise behind my eyes. Then she said, and I stand here for everyone who's ever felt the weight of being assumed before being known. When she stepped down, there was no thunderous applause. Just quiet nods. Touched faces. A few tears. The kind of reverence usually reserved for cathedrals. And rightly so. Because sometimes, the holiest spaces are the ones where we were once humiliated, and now choose to stand tall. As the crowd dispersed, I remained. I watched Clara walk the aisles again, this time slowly, as if absorbing each shelf, each label, each moment. She stopped beside me. You okay, Elijah? She asked, gently. I nodded. I just didn't think I'd live long enough to see this. She smiled. You almost didn't. I chuckled softly. Then I asked, do you forgive them? She thought for a long moment. Then said, I don't think forgiveness is a door that swings open all at once. I think it's a series of windows. Some cracked. Some nailed shut. Some wide open on days you never expected. She looked me in the eye. But I don't need forgiveness to move forward. I just need to know I can walk these aisles without carrying a shield. Later that week, I saw her at the church again, not to speak, not to testify. Just to sit. It was a Thursday, and the sanctuary was empty save for the cleaning crew and a few rays of light through the stained glass windows. She sat in Ruth's old pew, fourth from the front, far left. I joined her in silence. She looked up at the cross, then at me. I've never been very religious, she admitted. Medicine is messy. The things I see every day, they don't always lend themselves to neat stories with divine intervention. I nodded. You don't need religion to know God, I said. Sometimes healing is the holiest thing. She turned her gaze back to the altar. I don't think God saved me that day, she whispered. But I think I was supposed to be there for you. I reached for her hand. You weren't just supposed to be there for me. You were there for all of us. Spring came slowly that year. The dogwoods were late to bloom. The azaleas held back, as if waiting for permission. But when they came all at once. Just like healing. Just like change. One Sunday morning, weeks after Clara's speech, a young girl no older than 10 walked up to me after service. She wore a plastic stethoscope around her neck. "Is it true?" she asked, eyes wide. "Is that true, sweetheart? That Dr. Watkins saved you and someone else? In the same store? With her hands?" I smiled. Twice. With the same hands, they tried to lock up. She looked up, hopeful. "I want to have hands like that." I knelt beside her. "Then you already do," I said. "Just keep them steady. Keep them kind." And so, life returned. Not to what it had been, but to something better. The church started a scholarship in Clara's name for young black women pursuing medicine. The hospital adopted a new dignity clause for patient interaction protocols. The police department hired its first black female deputy. And Chestnut General became the most inclusive employer in 3 counties. None of it erased what happened. But all of it said, in one way or another, we will not let it happen again. As for me, I no longer pray for peace the way I used to. Now, I pray for courage. Because peace without courage is just permission for the strong to stay silent. I often think back to the sound that started it all, not the sirens, not the shouting, but the soft click of handcuffs. And how, in that moment, I didn't move. But Clara did. And then I did. And so did the town. There are aisles we avoid. And there are aisles we return to, not because we're ready, but because the world needs to know we can. And when we do return, not as victims, but as whole people, upright, unshaken, we make those aisles sacred again. That's what Clara Bell-Watkins did. She didn't just walk back in. She walked all of us forward. In life, we are often told that doing everything right will protect us. But this story reminds us that even excellence is not always enough in the face of prejudice. Dr. Clara Bell-Watkins, a gifted neurosurgeon, faced humiliation not because she failed, but because she existed in a world still learning to see her worth. And yet, she chose not retaliation, but restoration. Through quiet courage, compassion, and relentless grace, she turned an aisle of injustice into a path toward healing for herself, her town, and generations to come. The lesson is clear: when dignity is denied, reclaim it not with rage alone, but with resilience. Speak, not only for yourself, but for those who can't. And when you see wrong, don't just walk past it, stand up, even if your voice trembles. Because silence may protect comfort, but it never protects justice. If Clara's story touched you, let it live beyond this screen. Share it. Reflect on it. And remember, healing doesn't always begin in hospitals, it often begins in aisles, pews, and hearts that choose to change. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs hope. And subscribe to join us for more stories that honor courage, dignity, and truth.